Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Lanterns episode 1. It is simply called Pilot, which actually works more than usual in this case since Hal Jordan is in fact a pilot, or at least he was. So yeah, this is the Green Lantern show. This is the DC Comics, DC Studios TV show. I am a fan of DC. I'm a fan of Green Lantern as a concept. I've read a bunch of Green Lantern comics over the years. Obviously, I'm still a little bit wounded by the previous attempt to do a Green Lantern movie. That one was pretty rough. During a very, very dark time for DC movies, unless it was Batman, of course. So I was hopeful for this, but I was also going in with kind of reserved expectations. Like, the trailer, I think the first trailer for this felt a little bit weak in the sense that it felt like a TV show that was ashamed of what it actually was, right? It felt like it was trying to be this buddy cop thing and not actually a Green Lantern show. Having said that, like the trailer that came a bit later, the more recent trailers, did feel like they were a bit more full of the ideas. Maybe it was just a simple case of they didn't have effects done for that first one or whatever, but it felt like it was leaning in a bit more to the actual Green Lantern mythos, even though, don't get me wrong, this is still very much a focused, stylized take on Green Lantern. It's still not exactly just how the comics operate. It very much is doing its own TV version of these things, but not in a boring CW way where everything fits into the same formula. Arguably, it has taken inspiration from some different things. Obviously, when this was being pitched, it was kind of billed as a true detective style type of show, which there's kind of different parts of the timeline that we follow in the episode, so I think that's maybe kind of partly what they're doing there, aside from the mystery that needs to be solved and the fact that we have two main partners. It is kind of interesting that this is a HBO Max show that has F-bombs in it and things like that, because I wouldn't necessarily say that Green Lantern is one of the properties that should lean towards a more R-rated type of environment. But it doesn't necessarily feel out of place either. It's just kind of an interesting choice, if nothing else. Maybe it was just an idea of, we can build this up over time with an audience as a TV show rather than expect people to turn out in droves for a movie, right? Maybe we can do a movie down the line, maybe even with a different Lantern. But anyway, this is all to say that I'm going into this with fairly loaded ideas and expectations, because I'm a Green Lantern fan, I'm a DC fan, and that means it comes with a lot of expectations for who these characters are going to be, what they're going to feel like, and how it handles some of the lore, which so far it's mostly just hinting at a couple of things in the lore. A little bit of Hal Jordan's origin is brought up, and I was doing the Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the screen when he started talking about a bald purple alien, because I was like, that's Abin Sur, and then he said the name, Abin Sur. I was waiting for them to say Sector 2814, because if you've ever read Green Lantern in the last 30 years, you've probably had the number Sector 2814 shoved down your throat, or your eyeballs in that case, since it's a comic. But I was excited for, obviously, those things if the actual core storytelling was good or offered something that felt fresh. And my feelings on this first episode are fairly positive, actually. I'm quite intrigued by a few things going on here. I think, first of all, the two leads, we got Kyle Chandler as Hal Jordan, an older Hal Jordan, and we've got Aaron Pierre as John Stewart. And this is kind of a passing of the torch story, in theory at least. I mean, it feels like it might go some different places. Maybe they'll subvert that, of course, based on some things that happen in this episode. But that's very much where we're starting with these two characters. And I think they're both very good. I think they're both compelling. I think they both have charisma. They command screen presence whenever they're on it. It feels like they're battling toe for screen time, or screen, like, sort of aura, if you will. It never feels that one's overshadowing the other to me. It feels like they're both fitting into the roles very well. And it's interesting to see how jaded Hal Jordan is here at this part of his Green Lantern career, and just how they're tackling some of the ideas in the lore. For example, they're saying straight up in this show that he is the first human Green Lantern, which is a pretty typical thing in the comics as well. But they're also saying that that's still true as of 2006, where most of this episode takes place, which is interesting because obviously Guy Gardner was in the Superman movie, and that is is presumably present day 2025. So clearly, sometime in the 10 years since 2006, Guy Gardner stepped into the picture, which is going to be interesting when they tackle that. And he is expected to appear in this show, so I'm looking forward to finding that out. But yeah, I'm intrigued by the mystery, which is cool as well. But I think more than anything, and this is maybe not a surprise given some of the creative team involved here, which is Damon Lindelof, who I have liked far more of his work than I haven't. I loved Lost when it was on. Leftovers was a great show. That one season Watchmen show was great. He is an interesting choice for this. Also, comic book writer Tom King is involved with this, and I've really enjoyed a lot of his comics. So, like, there was good people behind this. There was reasons to think that the writing might be good, and I think for the most part it is. There's a couple of little like HBO things, like, you know, like there's a sex scene, for example, which I it's not like super gratuitous by HBO standards at all, right? It's actually pretty like by the numbers and reserved, but just the fact that we had to have one felt a little bit like we're trying to be a grown-up show kind of thing to me. Now, I'm sure there might be knock-on effects from that encounter that plays out in the show that might make it feel very, very necessary, but at least up front, it just kind of felt like, oh, it's a HBO show, we have to have at least some sex in here. So, but that's like a minor nitpick. Like, I'm not really that fussed. There's a couple of scenes in this episode in particular that I really liked. I'll just say the interrogation scene, because I'm not doing spoilers yet, but the interrogation scene, I think is very good. Very, very good. And I think the logic that's used in that scene is really, really smart, and was like thought was put into it. It's keeping this stuff feel grounded whilst it is showing you green constructs occasionally. Not a ton as of yet. I'm sure there'll be more as the show goes on. But I do think, it doesn't shy away from the fact that Hal Jordan can fly with the ring. Although it's an interesting choice that he doesn't have a green glow around him when he's flying, right? Which is fine. Like, I'll accept that the ring lets him fly without, like, embodying him in a green sort of shell that he's just... Because effectively that's how it works in the comics, is that they sort of have the green energy go around them, and they're making the green energy move with the ring, because that's what the ring does. It controls the energy that it creates, or the constructs that it creates, for the word that they actually use. So... it's just an interesting choice, and I think maybe they made a choice to like try and tone down like the constant green glow of things, so that it feels maybe one a little less hokey, right, and does feel a bit more grounded, because they want this to feel a bit more grounded, I think, clearly based on the tone they're going for and the vibes. But also it does mean that whenever there is a green construct, when we do see a green item or a glow of some kind from the ring, it does pop a bit more, right? Even though it's not like the strongest green in the world, right? Again, they're going for a slightly more muted green. It does pop because they intentionally, I mean, part of the reasons why I think they set this in like a sort of area where it's surrounded by a lot of kind of deserty type locations and stuff like that is because everything's very orange and yellow and brown and a bit of grey. Green notably stands out a lot more against those things. If they'd set this somewhere where there's lots of lavish forest in the background and lots of grass and lots of all this stuff, it necessarily wouldn't pop as much. And I think that may have actually been an intentional choice for at least some of this setting that they've chosen. There's some other reasons. The type of people that might live in this area is also a part of it, of course, once we get into the story and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I think this first episode, it's a bit of a slow burn. I think that would be a fair critique, but I do think it sets up some interesting stuff with both the main characters, that kind of... So not only do we have the overall mystery of, like, the case, right, of, like, what's happening, and it is to do with aliens, so again, we're not shying away from Green Lantern stuff there, but also, I think there's a nice little bit of mystery to both the main characters that we can explore, and they're not, like, people whip out the phrase mystery box maybe a little bit too much sometimes, and I know that Lindelof's attached to mystery box shows because a lot of his previous shows have been mystery box shows where things kind of fall together by the end, but typically speaking, I think he does make them work where everything does build to something, and even if something was never going to be answered, it kind of always feels like it's never going to be answered. I think this show, the mystery it sets up, which is a detective type mystery, like, we are going to get answers for a lot of this stuff. We're going to get, like, what's going on and find out how it connects to certain backstory stuff and whatnot. But the characters themselves have some, layers that are quite interesting. Now, the Hal stuff does maybe relate a bit more to the plot, but, we kind of get a sense of what Hal was like in 2006, right? 10 years before the main setting of the show. And he seems a bit different. It's like, okay, what changed there? What caused that difference in character? There's some things to explore. Jon Stewart's unconventional relationship with his father is definitely leaving some stuff to explore there. The opening scene is very memorable because his father comes across as a psychopath. So we'll get into all that stuff, but I think these character bits are very intriguing. Some of the supporting characters are maybe as interesting, at least not yet, right? They might develop into more, but ultimately it's the main two guys that we really need to give a crap about, and we need to care about what their relationship was, what's driving both of them. Because that's the thing as well with Jon Stewart as a character, specifically in the show, is that he's kind of been picked by the Guardians, who are mentioned. We never see the Guardians as of yet. I'm sure maybe we'll get to see them later in the season. That they might have briefly been in a trailer. I can't remember. But they're mentioned, and that they've picked him as the successor to Hal if and when something happens to Hal. So Hal's training him, right? And it's this idea that he's been built to be the perfect soldier who respects the chain of command. He's the perfect in every way. He says sir, he says thank you. He's by the book as it can be. And there's just little hints throughout the episode that there is a desire, like he's always doing that, he's always being that, but maybe somewhere in there is a desire to let a little bit of who he actually feels or wants to be out. And that's not to say that he's something completely the opposite. I don't think like they're building to a Jon Stewart that is like so flipped from like what he's acting as right now, but more just that there's, like effectively letting his hair down a little bit, right? And having sort of opinions that aren't just following what the book says and that kind of thing. So, but there's gravitas there. There's some mystique to kind of his character progression, and it's very different from Hal, which has all this backstory, and like, but even by 2016, he's got like 30 years experience as Green Lantern, because in the 1996 opening, when John's a kid watching the TV interview, he's already been Green Lantern for 10 years, meaning that he has been Green Lantern from circa 1986, which is interesting, because it means that in the course of this show, or this episode, we get the idea that he became Green Lantern in 1986. We see him be interviewed and be publicly kind of unveiled, and which is interesting because it's long before Superman showed up in this world that people knew about Green Lantern, so he's kind of predates Superman by a considerable amount. But we also know the JSA existed in some form in this world, so yeah, like this is a world where lots of superheroes in some form or another have existed before the dawn of the first movie that we got last year. But we also get a tease of like 2006 Hal, which I'll get into properly in spoilers, but we get a little sense of that as well. The main part of the story is 2016, and of course we are in 2026, and there's some teases that maybe we'll see some stuff from like present day. So we have this weird, interesting span of time that is all these 10-year jumps, right? Some of which we see, some of which we hear about, some of which are hinted at. But it's kind of fascinating to have it span effectively like 40 years, right? And over 5 intervals. I'm fascinated about what they're going to do with all those time periods and all the things that we can do with the mystery there and what we're building up to. But yeah, the interactions between the two leads are good. Some of the investigation stuff is quite good, the interrogation being the standout. There is some stuff where we're getting introduced to some other characters on a ranch that, I was feeling a little bit, that was where I was really feeling the slow burn, and I'm like, okay, this guy on the ranch isn't interesting yet, and we'll see if he becomes interesting. I know some people like the actor because he's been in some good stuff, but the character so far isn't all that hot for me. Although I will say this, so the character I'm talking about is Will Macon, played by Garrett Dillahunt, and before we meet him, we're introduced to Jason Ritter's character, Billy Macon, and he refers to his father, and we meet Garrett Dillahunt's character, and I didn't think we'd met his father yet because I didn't think they were too different in age enough to be father and son, but he is his father. I don't know what the actual age gap between them is, but it doesn't feel like it's as big as it should be. Because I think he's older, don't get me wrong, but it looks like he's like 10 or so years older, maybe 15 years older, not 20, 25, 30 years older. So that was actually a little bit confusing at first because I thought there was still someone else to meet, that we were finally going to meet the father eventually. I was like, oh no, I've been looking at him the whole time. That's kind of weird. So there's that. The other big main character, of course, that I've not mentioned is Kelly MacDonald, who plays the sheriff of this town they're in Nebraska. Kerry Kane is her name, which is a very comic booky name actually, but I don't think she's from any of the comics. I don't recognize the name, certainly. It was interesting actually, if maybe a little distracting, because the first thought I had when she popped up was I stopped almost paying attention to what the scene was and just started listening to her accent to see if her Scottish accent was slipping through. I don't think it was, and I think obviously Americans can judge her American accent better than I can to an extent, but there's definitely sometimes when like an actor from outside the US will do an American accent and it'll have that kind of generic American feel to it, where it's like they're not slipping, like they never let the real accent slip through, but you can kind of tell it's this kind of neutral generic American accent as opposed to like a specific part of America, and therefore you can tell it's fake, not because they ever slip, but just because it feels too perfect, which actually kind of fits into the interrogation scene a little bit, that line of thinking. But anyway, and she's fine so far. I like her attitude a little bit. I like her button heads with Hal. Again, there's a little bit of chemistry there, which is nice. So I think I'll have to say spoilers though from this point on, just so I can openly talk about anything I want to in the episode. I don't know if I'll go through every beat necessarily in this case, because I've spent already 15 plus minutes just kind of talking about general spoiler-free things. So spoilers from this point on for episode 1. You've been warned. So yeah, I want to talk about this interrogation. So the whole reason they're in this town is because Hal had set up basically not a reminder per se, because it's kind of having to be aware if something happens, more of an alert inside the ring. So we get like his 10 years younger self come out via hologram from the ring and talk to Jon Stewart. And it's kind of nice that Jon immediately is like, hey, you seem different. You're nicer. You're kind of a prick in 2016. But he's like, hey, the hail's fallen in Nebraska, and as soon as the present day Hal hears about this message, he immediately flies to the town. Jon has to take a plane. He gets there, and there's been they refer to it as a mass shooting, but it feels more like there was just more of like a gunfight that broke out at a college or a high school football game. Which I'm outside of I'm not American, so the idea of people going to a game like this is wild. I mean, I don't like sports in general, so but like I especially don't get going to a high school game. But it kind of becomes Hal's like adamant he thinks this is to do with aliens, and I liked his observations here. His observation being that the victims don't have any loved ones around who care about them, right? So therefore he's thinking that they're not actually from around here. And there's one who's maybe ditched the shirt, so there's maybe one that's alive who's trying to not look like he's been with the other characters. And Jon notices this, but he kind of messes up by going over to talk to the sheriff about it, because she already knew about this and she was trying not to make him jumpy. And he runs off when he realizes that he's been made. So there's a bit of a chase. The chase is whatever. It's fine. They run through a school. The one thing I noted is that Jon runs a little bit like the T-1000 with the straight arms up and down. It's very, robotic. But they get him. Sheriff won't let them talk to him. So Hal has this crazy idea of getting into a bar fight just so that he'll get arrested and be put in the jail cell next to him so he can talk to him, because the sheriff wouldn't let him interrogate him. However, the sheriff's too smart for this, so when Jon shows up to the station the next day, she's like, oh, I knew he wanted to talk to him, so I locked him in the broom closet instead. So again, it's showing that she's smart, she can see through Hal's bullshit, and that's kind of funny, and that's all very nice. But this all leads up, after we get all the ranch stuff, and we get all the arraignment stuff, which, that's the part where I was feeling the slow burn of the episode. I think the court stuff, while a little bit amusing, and the ranch stuff just was where it felt like it slowed down. Once we got back to the interrogation, though, it really got cooking. because I love this interrogation scene, because the sheriff is still not is still adamant this guy's not an alien. And part of this is because she knows if it's an alien, then it becomes Green Lantern's jurisdiction, right? Right now, she's like, hey, this is a terrestrial human murder or human shooting. We'll deal with this. We don't want you stepping on our toes. Kind of like when, like when local police get annoyed because like the FBI come in to deal with it instead, and they feel like they're taking over their case. That's kind of that. But also the other big part of it that she gets into is this idea of like, she doesn't want to cause a panic. Like, it's one thing to hear about Green Lantern talking about aliens being out there on TV, but it's a little bit different for it to be actually in front of them, right? Where they have to actually come face to face with it. Which is actually one of the things that I like about this show and the Superman movie, and just this DCU in general that they've got going so far, is that I love how normalized the world is to the fact that aliens exist and that these larger-than-life things exist. Like, they didn't opt for this idea that everyone's in wonderment that any of it is happening. It's like, no, this has been relatively a thing that exists in this world for some time. We're used to it existing, just maybe not being right in front of us. And that's kind of what Kelly MacDonald's sheriff character is getting at. But the interrogation is really good, because Hal goes in and he starts asking this guy questions about the football team and the history of the team. And the guy, has to think about a couple of them because they're tough questions, but he gets the answers right. And then out of nowhere, he just changes to, what school did Harry Potter go to? And the guy's like, what? And Hal makes his point that, yeah, if you're going to like pretend to be someone, if you've got a cover, if you're like a double agent or something like that, you learn about your character, right? You learn everything your character's supposed to know, maybe even more than you should, because you memorize it, you overread. But you don't necessarily learn about all the little things that everyone knows, because you're not focusing on those like wider world details that you would just get from pop culture and osmosis and things like that. So he has no idea what the answer to the Harry Potter question is. And I think that was a nice little gotcha. And then the extension to that is he asks about, Obama, right? He says, oh, you wouldn't know about this person, or that person. And he ends on Obama. The idea being that these other people that he brings up, these other celebrities or characters, the guy has no idea about. But when he gets to Obama, he's like, oh, I know that. That's the president. That's the 40-something president and blah, blah, blah. He clearly knows this because it's obviously a fact that he should know who the president is. He's clearly studied this to know who the president is. But it's like he's just read a wiki page, so he can only give facts. He can only give things that are like known about him that are kind of like you can put a blurb on something. What he doesn't have, and this is what Hal really points out, is that he doesn't have an opinion on Obama, right? He basically says, oh, he's the 40-something president and this. He went to this school. And he ends his sentence, and Hal's like, wait, so you're like a redneck from this part of Nebraska, and that is the extent of your opinion on Obama? And it's like he's made his point. And it cuts back to like the other two, like watching through the window, and Kelly MacDonald's face is like, oh, son of a bitch. Like, god damn it, he's got a point here. He's got a point. And sure enough, like immediately the act is pretty much dropped. I mean, technically the guy says, hypothetically, if I'm an alien, but then he just talks like he's the alien, right? He's an alien. He knows he's an alien. He says he's got explosives inside his body that he can set off and it'll take out the whole town. But it shows Hal's character quite a bit, because Hal's like, oh, well, are we talking or are we exploding? Because, lunch is coming up. And he gets under Hal's skin a little bit, because he's like, hey, have you got a death wish? Because doesn't that like violate your oath? And then the alien, the villain, says the oath, in brightest day and blackest night, so on and so on. And that pisses Hal off, but it brings up the lanterns needed to recharge, so that is a mechanic that we are going to use in the show, so that was interesting to hear that. Because they might have just ignored that and just said, oh, the rings have always got power. But they're not doing that. They've got the lantern. They've got the oath. The oath's important, right? It's a big part of Green Lantern lore. You gotta have the oath. And yeah, so this guy fights back, and then he goes to explode, and Hal just makes a green bubble around him to try and contain the blast. Now there is a bit of a shockwave still that makes a bit of a hole in the wall and knocks the others back a little, but by and large it's been contained, and there's no like super big damage other than the hole in the side of the police station. And it's like, okay, that was a really fun sequence. I liked the logic. I liked how he got him talking. I liked how he found holes in his like cover and his argument. I liked that. And I also liked the little hints that get Hal getting mad at being, talk to about the oath, and like this idea that we're almost like telegraphing, that Hal's going to die, right? And hell, the first time they announced the cast for this, and they announced that Hal was an actor who was about 60 or so, I was like, oh, like he's dead, like he's totally dying by the end of it. Especially once they found out that Jon Stewart is going to be in the next Superman movie, which is cool. I'm excited for that now that he's going to be there. But all of this points to, oh, he's going to pass the torch by the end of this, and we're going to get a dramatic Hal Jordan death. And that's fine. Like, I wouldn't be mad at that. One, because Hal's not the most interesting Green Lantern from the comics anyway, so I don't necessarily mind him being a short-lived character in this universe. And two, there's a lot of human Green Lanterns in the comics. We'd like to get to some of the more interesting ones, and Jon, I think, is a more interesting character than Hal. Even though there's a lot of attachment to Hal, because he is the first of the modern style of Green Lantern. Which is to say, you know, like, I mean, obviously we're ignoring the Golden Age Alan Scott Green Lantern. But I won't get into that. It's a separate thing. It's very different. It's not the Green Lantern Corps or any of that stuff. So, yeah, I really like that sequence. I thought that sequence was fantastic. I also really like the sequence in the bar where they're talking about Hal's origin, and he brings up Abin Sur and the green bubble and all that stuff, and how he didn't understand what Abin Sur was saying until the ring went on his finger, and then all of a sudden he could understand it all. It was in perfect English, because that's something the rings do. They translate. So I'm like, okay, I like that. That'll be a cool mechanic, because especially since we only have one ring between the two lead characters, and while Hal has handed it off to Jon a few times, and we've seen Jon use it in some small ways, notably to survive the Kargan off the cliff that Hal does to him. He basically just Charlie Days his way out the car and says, "Wild card, bitches," and leaves the ring with Jon so that Jon can use it to protect himself, and says that he's teaching him after the fact. So, yeah. Which, to be fair, Jon is no stranger to extreme tactics and teaching, because his father, as we see in the opening sequence, his brothers are scared of him coming home and the TV being on, but when he does get home, he takes him outside and is basically training him not to have fear. So he puts an apple on his head, points a gun at him, and shoots the apple. And then acts all proud because Jon, didn't flinch, didn't freak out or anything like that. And there's holes in the wall as if they've been doing this as he's been getting taller. So he's been doing this for a while. It's not even just at this current age that he's at, which is already messed up as it is. And it does feel, the implication here is when he gets in, that he says, "Hey, did they say a name?" And he's like, "Yeah, Hal. His real name's Hal something." The fact that he's already training him to not feel fear makes me think that in this show, he was already picked. Or at the very least, he was already training to be in contention to be picked. Right? And his father is almost like the military version of like a showbiz parent who's like getting their kid ready for the big job they think they want them to do. He does seem to have an okay relationship with his father in present day, or in 2016 when he's on the phone with him, but it's definitely an extreme thing, and it's very messed up, and I'm actually looking forward to exploring more of this backstory they're setting up for Jon here. So, very, very neat. Yeah, the big ending scene, of course, of the show, of this first episode, is that it does go forward again to 2026, which is interesting. And Jon's got a goatee, which is cool, because Jon Stewart has had a goatee in some iterations, and I enjoy that. I do. And he comes to meet Kelly Macdonald's character, and they're a lot more welcoming to each other. Right? He asks about how her kid is, and they hug. It feels like whatever happens in this town in 2016, they do become friends. And that's interesting. Maybe they both just like bitching over Hal Jordan, which, bonding as it were. So you've got this idea of Hal Jordan's dead in 2026, right? He's frozen on the same part of the benches that he was sitting in earlier in the episode at the football field. And he doesn't have the ring on because Jon checks his hand, which, obviously Jon doesn't have the ring either. So that raises some interesting questions. Is this because Guy has his ring? Did it go to Guy instead? And why did it go to Guy? Is it because Jon did something that pissed off the Guardians in 2016 that we've not gotten to yet? Is it because some other reason? Does a villain have it, right? Are we building to a Sinestro of some kind? Given that Hal's already older, I wonder if Sinestro has already been a thing with Hal, and we're going to get to exploring some of that down the line. I don't know. There's a lot of ideas. I don't remember if they ever announced this in Astro Actor or anything like that. I'm not going to look. I'm not going to check. I'm also not going to look at the trailers because they put like a trailer for the rest of the season after this episode. I'm not going to look at that either. I would rather just be going in cold now for the rest of this, aside from my comic book knowledge. But obviously, they're going to change things. They're going to do their own version of things. So those are the big standout scenes and moments, I think, for the most part. Obviously, I'll mention that John, the woman he had sex with from the bar, ended up being the wife of the guy in the ranch who seems to know that they had sex. Maybe they've got a very open marriage. That's a whole thing. I guess the other big thing to talk about, though, is maybe some of the key themes here, which is we've got a story about aliens, right, who have illegally come into the planet Earth. The parallels with just talking about immigrants and illegal aliens is not an accident, right? That is absolutely something we're doing. There's even the little moment when John first gets to the football field where the cop or the guard tries to say he can't go in and he has to say that he's with Hal. And, he never says anything too, like, overt, but it does kind of feel, like a little bit of like a racial tension kind of thing. Like, he doesn't want to let the black man in. And I do wonder if we're going to be touching on more of that as well as we go through some of this season, right? This idea of the other, right? Whether it be someone of a different race, someone from a different country coming in. I think that's is definitely what the aliens are representing here. And the idea that you have this ranch, which effectively has a militia where they're training with automatic weapons, they've got body armor and all this stuff because they're against the aliens. And certainly, as Hal was trying to get answers out of this guy, and the guy was like, hey, I bailed you out because I, believe we've got the same cause. We're against aliens, and we want to take out the aliens who are, I believe that man you're chasing after, he's the scouting party for a full invasion. And it feels like the ramblings of someone who's a bit of a, not even a conspiracy theorist, that's not even the right phrase here, but someone who has made an enemy out of another group and is rising up. It feels like it very much represents anyone who is, like, I don't know if I want to compare them necessarily to something like Ice, but certainly that a little bit mixed with again more kind of a militia, more of your kind of weekend warrior SEAL team or meal team 6 kind of thing. But like it definitely felt like he's like saying we're on the same side, we're against aliens, but I don't think Hal is against aliens. And I think the idea being that he's, obviously if aliens cause problems, if they're committing crimes, if they're murdering people, if they're doing things like that, that's when Hal is going to step in. But Hal also will have spent more time with other aliens than anyone on Earth, right? He's worked with aliens in the Green Lantern Corps, presumably at some point. He's been on other planets. He mentions being on another planet earlier in this very episode. I find it very hard to believe, even though he's not really openly talked about it yet, that he doesn't, respect other species from other planets, that he doesn't respect aliens. And it feels like that's something that this guy is basically just racist, right? It's racist against aliens, but it's effectively just standing in for racist against any type of immigrants going into the country. That's what they're doing here. And I think that is rich to be met. It's a rich story to be mined over the course of this season with whatever they're going to do. I don't know like how heavy they're going to get with it, but given that this is Lindelof and Tom King, I don't think they're going to be pulling punches. I don't think it being set in 2016 for the majority of the main story. Maybe that'll change a little bit episode to episode, where maybe we spend more time in different time periods depending on the episode. But 2016 is very, very intentional, right? 2016 was a big year. That was the year of the election that got Trump in the White House. That is not an accident that they picked that year to be this kind of focal point of everything going on. 100% they picked that because of that. And the rising right-wing attitude and all those other things. It definitely is why that year is picked. So I am excited to see them explore a lot of that. It makes me think there's going to be a lot of depth to this story, even when it's, even when I'm not entertained by Green Lantern-esque shenanigans. But it's not like I was disappointed in that stuff. I like kind of the amount of history that's there with it, right? It doesn't show a lot of Green Lantern stuff this episode, but I was okay with that because it was you know, it was kind of like, Hal's this old timer who has this history. So it felt like anytime something came up from his past, as little as it might be, it feels like, oh yeah, this has been a world he's been living in for decades. This is established history. It's one of the things that I liked about the Superman movie, is that, you know, that opening text said, yeah, like, he's been active for 5 years. Metahumans have been a thing for centuries. I like that this world already feels lived in and alive, and we're not stuck doing origin stories. Arguably, this is kind of an origin for Jon Stewart, but even with his stuff, you know, we didn't, you know, we got him as a kid, obviously, in that one scene, but like, we've jumped into when he's already with Hal and he's already training. We're getting to some of the more interesting things, and we're not just doing straight origin stories. Like, the approach to this stuff so far in this universe feels a lot closer to the comic books, in that we don't always have to start from the beginning and build to the more interesting stuff. It feels like, no, we can have an established world already existing. And I think that's smart for a number of reasons. One, because it would take several movies and TV shows to get to the point where this is all feeling like we're a lived-in world. And that's a lot of catching up to do. And as someone who is a fan of these characters and these properties already, like, I kind of like just jumping into a more interesting part where it feels like a lot of what's in this show and being alluded to with the mystery, it feels like a lot of that stuff is going to end up being pulled from famous Green Lantern comic book storylines, with whoever the villain's going to turn out to be, with whatever they're building up to. There's possible big comic book like event storylines that they are maybe setting up for either a future movie or a future season of this, if it's going to be multiple seasons. There's a lot of potential here, and I love that they're drawing on it, and they're kind of using the fact that there's already decades of Green Lantern lore that's played out in backstory to build the mystery around that, so that when we get to the reveals perhaps of some of the things going on, it's going to work really well for someone who knows the comics, but it'll also work well as a way to discover these things if you don't know the comics, because they're building and building, and it's going to be memorable how they build to it and reveal those things. So I see potential here. Now, that's like, I'm being very positive right now. I don't think this is a complete home run of an episode. This is not like the first episode of like a Pluribus or something like that, where I'm like, oh man, this was like next level stuff. I think it's very solidly directed. I think there's specific scenes that are really well written. I think the main characters are really good, and I kind of like them touching on the lore and teasing it without going all in so far. And Kelly MacDonald's actually a pretty decent supporting character. The other supporting characters, you know, Jason Ritter, the ranch dude, his wife, I don't really feel anything for those characters as of yet. We'll see if they grow on me in coming episodes, but it is nice to be invested in a show like this again, and hopefully that keeps up as we go through the episodes, and it makes me care more about what's going on. So I'm looking forward to watching this weekly and caring about it, and hopefully I come out satisfied on the other end. But yeah, so there you go. That's my thoughts on the first Green Lantern episode. I didn't go through every scene necessarily in this one, but you know, I've been talking for almost 40 minutes. I've I think I've covered what I wanted to talk about. But promising. It's a promising start. You know, couple of slow parts or nitpicks, but I'm very intrigued by what we're building to now, and I'm excited to see some more of this Green Lantern lore teased and fleshed out. And maybe it'll be exciting because, you know, they can really parse it out the way they're doing it with jumping around in the timeline. Like, we can have a scene with a Guardian next week. A week after that, maybe we'll get a flashback to Abin Sur. Who knows? Like, they can do whatever they want in terms of sprinkling this stuff out throughout the season, and I'll be very intrigued to see where we go with that. Yeah. So yeah, as far as constructs this episode, we got money, right? Hal counterfeited some money for the jukebox. We got a bottle opener, and then sort of generic bubbles and things of that nature. So yeah. Now Jon Stewart said he made bubble wrap to you know, save himself inside the car that went off the cliff. We didn't get to really see that though. It kind of cut away and we just saw like a green flash as he started using the ring. I would have loved to have seen the amount of green bubble wrap that he had around him to protect himself from the car. I would have thought just one big bubble that's impenetrable would have done, but you know, hey, he's new, right? In fact, one of the interesting things in the comics between the Green Lanterns, the different kinds, is that their constructs tend to be different, right? John, because he's, aside from being a military man, he's also an engineer in the comics, so he tends to make things that are a lot more mathematically, like, correct or mechanically. It does things that are, built out of structure or scaffolding or things that make sense to an engineer, that you could almost, it's almost like he's picturing schematics for things. Whereas, Hal is like, no, here's a big baseball bat, here's a big bubble, here's a big, catcher's mitt or something. Kyle's a lot more artistic, so he gets a lot more flourishy with like characters and things like that. And so on and so forth, right? It kind of varies between the different Green Lanterns. Once we got past 3 or 4, there stopped being as much variance just because there's so many of them that it's hard to give them all a distinct style with their constructs. But I'll be curious to see if they try and keep some of that in here, where their constructs are kind of like got a different flavor from each other based on what they're needing. Maybe John always thinks of something that's structurally sound, whereas Hal's just whatever simple thing pops in his head first. And we can play with that, in the future. So that'll be cool. But yeah, I think that's me for this first episode. I'm sure there's a couple of things that I didn't talk about that I should have, but I'm looking forward to more. By all means, let me know what you thought of this one in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that stuff helps out a bunch if you do. Of course, you can support all the other stuff over at Patreon. You can get some bonus stuff over there. Supports both here in the TV channel, but also over the movie channel where all the movie podcasts live. So yeah, and who knows? Maybe we'll even see a different color of lantern by the end of this season. Eh? That'd be something. Obviously, if we're going to see one, it'll be yellow, right? Maybe they'll surprise me, but yellow's the first one we're going to see. Assuming we even get like any, and if we ever get, we may only ever get one more. We might never do the full spectrum, but here's hoping. I don't know how much they've got planned out for this show, but hopefully it's ample. But yeah, thank you very much for joining me. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?